Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In this episode, we're joined by Dave Chawner. Dave's a #1 best-selling author, award-winning stand-up comedian, presenter and mental health campaigner. Dave's first Edinburgh show, Normally Abnormal, used humour to explore his anorexic past to critical acclaim and launched a sell-out tour and a book deal, and he's now become a high-profile ambassador engaging and educating people about anorexia and other topics ranging from adult circumcision to veganism. So hopefully we'll hear some about that. So welcome, Dave.
Hello. Thank you very much. What a lovely intro that was. And intriguing as well. I like that.
Great. Perhaps you can take us back to when you first started experiencing challenges around food. You know, what was going on at that time in your life?
You know what? I think that's a really interesting point, because I think we've all got a relationship with food, and I don't think I ever really considered mine fraught or unusual until I sort of like reached sort of 15, 16. And it was something that developed rather than particularly began. A number of things kind of just came to a head. I had got a lead role in a school play, and in that play, I thought I had to appear topless, so I thought I would lose a little bit of weight. And then as I started to do that, people started congratulating me, and people that I didn't even know, like, you know, sort of like, well done, mate, good on you, and sort of started giving me praise for it. And praise is nice, and I thought that was good. And then I got noticed by a girl for the first time ever, and I started to, you know, sort of really everything came together. It was really lovely. And I'm really keen to point out that eating disorders very rarely to do with food, and absolutely not a diet gone wrong. But I think the balance kind of tipped when I started. I had this beautiful, amazing, very privileged life that I loved living. I had a great gang of mates, a brilliant school, everything was nice at home, and then that all had a sell-by date because I was going to go away to university. And I think now in hindsight, the obsession with weighing myself, the obsession with calorie counting, the fixation on exercise became a way of controlling something when everything else felt so out of control. And it seemed to make sense in my mind that as I had started to do those things, you know, when I'd started to lose weight, things had become good. So the more weight I lost, the more gooder they would perhaps become.
So were there any signs that you recognized yourself that maybe it wasn't such a good thing?
There were signs, but I didn't recognize that it was a bad thing. I thought it was a good thing. One of the things that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear, let alone talk about, is that I loved the eating disorder, and just throughout, absolutely loved it. And I think it's very, people don't want to say that because they think you're glorifying it or encouraging it. But I remember being at school and we had a talk, one of these talks about drugs, and like a policeman, a copper came in who was like, "Don't take drugs, kids. They do this," and showed all of these photos. And I remember one of my mates turning to me and goes, "He's an idiot. I had a spliff on the way to school. Lovely stuff." And there is a reason that people turn to drink. There is a reason people turn to drugs and substance abuse. It is a short-term gain for a longer-term detriment. And you need to acknowledge that. You need to treat people like an adult. So I realized what I was doing was kooky. Like I was skipping lessons to go home to weigh myself. I bought books on calorie counting while my mates were buying FHM and Nuts magazine. I could have told you what was in most high street products to the single calorie. I knew it was abnormal, but did I think it was bad? Absolutely not, because I loved it.
And how did, for people that haven't lived with an eating disorder, how does this physically manifest on a daily basis? So you've talked about the fact that you are very interested in the calories in food and weighing yourself. But what does it look like in terms of the food that you eat? You know, are you restricting yourself? Are you carefully managing everything that you eat?
Well, the irony here is that my food became ruled by food. Absolutely. When you say that you can't have something, that is the first thing you want. You know, it's like, it always makes me laugh when people put up wet paint signs. They're like, well, I wasn't going to go and rub that wall, but now I want to. And it's the same with food. It's a common misconception that, anorexics just don't eat. It's very common that they will binge. So I would, for high days and holidays, I think like Easter and Christmas, I would starve myself as much as possible with the intent of, when it gets to Christmas, I'm going to go mad. When it gets to Easter, I'm going to go mad. I remember very embarrassingly, and I think it's like a repressed memory, but I remember we had like our sort of cousins come round once, a sort of like cousins, just very close family friend. And I'd binged so much that I must have been 17. I remember lying on the floor and it was so painful and I'd had to take my top off. And my mum and dad staring at my stomach, and it was genuinely a little Buddha belly because I'd not even chewed the food; it had gone down whole. And they were like, "Christ, are you all right? Look at that's mad." And I had to go to bed at 8:30 because I just binged too much. So my days became ruled by food, by when I was next going to eat. But there was, sort of never any one sort of general routine. I had what is commonly called like safe food. So things that I'm like, look, they're lower calorie, or, I know the sky's not going to fall in when I eat them. So I certainly had things like that. But it was very, very ad hoc.
Were you hiding it? I mean, were you, the people around you notice what was happening? I know, obviously they could see your Buddha belly on the floor, but was it something you kept hidden?
Not really. I was very lucky, and I really bang the gong for humour being used as a really helpful coping mechanism, but it can be maladaptive. And one of the things is I used humour in order to deflect. I remember a mate of mine, really good mate of mine, I was still in touch with, go, Jesus, mate, you've lost so much weight. How, like, so quickly have you done it? I'd be like, anorexia, innit? Everyone needs a hobby. And he would just kind of chuckle. And then we crack on with our lives. Of course, I had my mom crying and screaming at me that, you're anorexic, or my mate Shelley pulling me aside, going, mate, I think you're anorexic. This isn't normal. But what I was doing was not only enjoyable, but it wasn't Hollyoaks, it wasn't EastEnders. And like, look, I kind of felt and brushed it off that eating disorders happen to rich, waspy women. I wasn't one of them. So look, it's not a thing. I'm enjoying this. Let's all just chill out. And it's very difficult to tell when a social drinker becomes an alcoholic. And I think food is even more tricky because, not everyone drinks, but everyone has to eat. And I think that's why it's so difficult to tell.
And at what point did you think, actually, I do have a bit of a problem here? Was it a gradual realization, or was there a specific tipping point?
Yeah, I think it was like a drug of like chasing that dragon became harder and harder. So I had to do more and more in order to get any hit from it. And I still remember those amazing moments of stepping on the scales and I got down to my target weight and I felt amazing and I'd wear the clothes that I'd saved up for that day. But I think the nearest I ever properly came to a sort of down and out moment was my second year in university. I took this job teaching English as a foreign language to kind of international kids that go to these private schools around the country. And I'd never been to posh private schools before. I went to the most underfunded school in Staffordshire. And that in itself, the opportunity to teach at a private school, get in. But it was £100 for a week's work. And I couldn't believe that someone would pay me £100 per week. At that point in time, when I was 20, back in what that would have been, where 2009, 2010, I was like, £100, this is mad. So I did it. And I remember I was in remote Somerset in this place called Bruton. And the nearest village was 3 miles away. All of the food was catered for. It was pizza, pasta, chips. There was no healthy option. There was no calorie count. There was nowhere to prepare your own food. And I couldn't leave and go to a shop to buy food. And I remember it being very embarrassing because I remember binging in the food hall in front of my class, in front of other teachers. And then I started stealing food so that I could binge in my room, but that led to a rat infestation. And people were like, mate, what are you doing? Like, we have food in the floor. Why are you keeping this horrible food in your room? And then I started setting my alarm in the middle of the night so that I could do laps around the campus and exercise. And it was only when a teacher just very openly kind of went, look, I've been in therapy for bulimia 3 times. I find this a tricky environment. Have you ever thought that you might be anorexic? That was a turning point because it was the first time anyone had asked me whether I thought I had an eating disorder rather than telling me. But it was also a real pressure cooker environment where I was like, I am really out of control. And, having nightmares genuinely about donuts, body checking myself anytime I walk past the mirror. I remember distinctly thinking, I don't want to live like this because this is now miserable.
And so what did you do to get support?
Truth of the matter is, I did bugger all. I mean, very common. I acknowledged that I'd had a problem, and through then I'd always kind of like seeded it in, and I'd always placed it as something in the past because I think mental health in general has quite a bad rep for people to reach crisis point before they get any help. And that was exactly what I did. I was like, look, yeah, I've got this obsession, but obsession with food is hardly a rare thing. I'm just not going to do anything about it. I actually ended up getting help when I was 23, 24. And by that time, I knew what it was doing. I knew that anorexia kills one person every 62 minutes, and that anorexia has the highest death rate than any mental illness. It's highest fatality rate than any other one. And it was a passive suicide intent. So I'd started writing the letters for after I'd gone. I'd started recording the videos for my niece when she was older and I wasn't around. And the thing that fundamentally made me get help was I went to a GP because I'd started getting depression, and I played the system, and I refused treatment 4 times because I knew how I could stay out of being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And I remember getting put onto Lambeth talking therapies, and a really exacerbated nurse said to me, look, bottom line, you wouldn't expect your laptop to work if you don't charge it. Why do you expect your brain to work when you ain't feeding it? And a little bit of tough love went a hell of a long way because that spoke to me in terms that I could understand. And the idea of living rather than dying with this, by the time I was sort of probably mid-30s, I was like, wow. And that was really terrifying. And that was how I entered therapy. And I got diagnosed as severely clinically anorexic and had to have my treatment fast-tracked and was under the care of the Maudsley Hospital in South London for about 2.5 years. So I actually got in through the back door.
And what about, I wanted to ask you about being a man and being diagnosed with anorexia, because you said yourself earlier, initial preconceptions is maybe just happens to rich women. So how did it feel being a man asking for help?
You know what? It's a really good question. I always used to be quite acerbic with this and say, like, you wouldn't ask a dentist, like, is it a female or a male patient you're going to get? But I do think that gender does come into it in the sense that one of the things that I loved about the anorexia is when you don't feed your body, you don't feed your brain. And part of it, part of the illusion that it gives you is that it numbs unwanted things. And one of the things that I was very uncomfortable with, especially around puberty, and spoiler alert, anorexia is quite commonly known to onset during puberty and prepubescence, is when I start getting these urges. And I worry now more than ever because I don't think there are very many positive male role models out there. And I felt like the message that I always kind of got that when men were naughty, and the origin of most problems was sex. And if you wanted to have sex with a bad man, you should be hit on the nose with a rolled up newspaper and told to go and have a cold chat. You don't want sex. And so actually not eating starved out that sex drive, but it also starved out that masculinity, which I kind of felt made me less of a threat. So and I was always very lucky that I've, sort of the friends I've had around me, that I can just joke things off. So I was always the kind of effeminate one. I was never a gym goer. If anything, I was the one that, like, God, I listed up for baked beans today, or, knocking me out sort of thing. I was always a beta male. And the anorexia kind of like fed into that. The only time I think that I really thought about my gender was when I was in therapy, and it is a story that I do tell on stage, but it's absolutely true that as this kind of like journey had gone on, that I'd sort of tried to be better with, being comfortable with my gender and sexuality and sort of like flirting and stuff like that, and being quite open that, I like sex too and whatever. And I sort of on off dated this girl, and she dumped me, and one of my mates said, well, look, there's this group therapy for people with eating disorders. Why don't we go? And I hadn't really thought about it, but when I went downstairs, it was me and 14 girls. And they said, look, we've got someone new. Tell us a bit about yourself and why you're here. And I said, well, my name's Dave. I'm currently going through therapy for anorexia, and I've just been dumped. And I think one of the things about the anorexia, one of the many things, is that I'm lonely. And then they went over to the next girl, and she was like, well, hi, I'm Josie. I've been here for the past, I've been recovered for the past 3 years, but I'll be honest, I haven't dated anyone in the past 5 years. And I'd like to meet a man who kind of understands it. And I was like, Jesus, this is speed dating, isn't it? You know what I mean? So it's like, that is the only time where I was kind of pressed up against the glass and was like, oh, this is more of a thing. But yeah, I think in general, I quite liked that it got rid of my masculinity.
And this may be a strange question, but when you were going through your recovery, and I know you said it took quite a long time, did you have to kind of rediscover that masculinity? Did you rediscover yourself?
Massively. And this is something that I always say, it was like going through a second puberty. And the thing that was amazing about therapy and that whole kind of year was I took it as like a gap year. I was like, look, I've never taken a gap year. I'm not middle class enough. So you know what? Actually, I'm going to try stuff, and I'm going to fail at stuff. And I did fail. And I did try stuff, like, no, that's not for you. And yeah, absolutely. Lots of things came back, not only your sex drive, not only your masculinity, but even weird things you might not even think of, as I was always cold. That was almost part of my identity. Oh, Dave's always cold. And I started to get heat back in my body. And that was very strange. And people were like, God, I've never seen you in a t-shirt before. Christ, I know it's 32 degrees, but you're normally in a coat. And there are loads of little things. It really was like going through a sort of second awakening. And I think that's what is quite challenging about eating disorder treatment, is that identity aspect of, I've hung on to so many of these things for so long. Who even am I beyond it?
And was there a point where you felt better? Was there a point where you woke up one day and thought, actually, I'm not thinking about all those things I used to think about, and I now feel I've got a healthier approach to everything, not just food? I know you said it's not just about food. Was there or is it just a gradual recovery process?
I'm always skeptical about those kind of Hollywood moments, because I think they can be quite reductive. But I think the truth of the matter is, for me, I remember very specifically, there was Thursday in March, and I'd just gone to therapy, and I remember standing at the bus stop and going, Christ, this is what it used to feel like being me. And it was so long that I'd got, and it was like meeting someone whose face you recognized in Waitrose, and then had pinpointed where you knew them from. And I was like, God, I used to love them. I was silly. I was stupid. I was up for failing. I was up for stupid anecdotes, stupid escapades. And I love that. And I remember that very specifically, thinking about that at the bus stop, and was like, you know what? I am motivated by fun rather than fear. And everything else had been, oh, you're going to kill yourself and stuff like that. To be honest, that didn't really bother me. What did excite me was this motivation. This could be fun. This could be an excuse. This could be a right laugh. And yeah, I think that was really the real motivational moment of like, let's do this. This will be a laugh.
So what made you decide to kind of start to talk publicly about it, and then ultimately, apply a kind of comedy lens to it?
I think humor was so important. I think to split that question into two, I'd always been very open and honest in sort of talking about this, and I'd always placed it in the past. Because if you say to someone, I have anorexia now, it gets really awkward. If you sort of place it in the past, people like ask questions, very inquisitive, and generally, 99 out of 100 people incredibly helpful, lovely, and benevolent. I think that by that point in time when I was going through the anorexia, stand up had become my job. I started going to see stand up live when I was 18. And I was like, Jesus, this thing is amazing. And when I went to see comedy, I think there were so many things I loved about it. I think to me, going to a stand up comedy night is good mental health. Most routines are actually quite dark in nature. You know, there are very few stand ups out there that are doing stuff about like, oh, well, I'm too popular or I am too rich. You know, it was actually always about failing at stuff, you know, whether you're failing with the opposite sex or people that you're attracted to, failing at meeting your parents' expectations, like even failing at stand up. And I loved that these failures, these absolute clowns got on stage and were gods for 20 minutes. And I remember distinctly thinking about that. If I could do that with my mental health, if I could make it engaging and funny, that would be great. Because worst case scenario, you have no interest in mental health. Humor makes things funny. Humor makes things memorable. It's covering it in glitter. And I think everybody wins with that. As long as it's genuinely funny and not just there to try and, you know, sort of open a vein on stage and just, you know, be all mawkish and whatever. If you can genuinely make it funny, incredible. More power to you.
So how did you go about kind of crafting your show, Normally Abnormal?
Yeah, that's kind of a long answer. I mean, I did a half-hour show with a wonderful comic friend of mine called Robin Perkins. We did a show called Over It, Death, Anorexia, and Other Funny Things. And then that went on, we sort of took that around, we took that to the Edinburgh Fringe. And then I did my debut in 2014, and it was just basically more stuff about that. And I learned so much from that, and I now gone on to create a comedy course specifically aimed to get people engaged in mental health. So it's aimed at blokes, it's aimed at black communities, it's aimed on people at low or no incomes who just don't see themselves reflected in the current narrative. To teach them stand-up comedy is something, oh God, that's exciting, isn't it? But also got the benefit of, yeah, this is how you make sense of your mental health, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's a great way of making sense of it. And there's loads of little tricks that I subliminally learned that I've sort of now formalized. Things like joking around the topic, not about it. So to give a little example of that, you know, there's loads of jokes about anorexia where the person with anorexia is the butt of the joke. Lazy jokes, kind of things like, you know, my girlfriend has anorexia, sucks for her, but I get 2 dinners, or, you know, something like that. Whereas joking around the topic is more interesting to me, but I think goes a lot further because nobody else could write that. For example, story that I always tell is that I was obsessed with exercise, as I mentioned earlier on, and always go upstairs when I was living with mom and dad, and I'd be in my bedroom and I'd do 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 20 squats. I was always doing sit-ups, always doing squats. And when I wrote the show about the anorexia, I said to my mom, like, did you not realize the exercising was going on? And she said, oh, well, in fairness, when your teenage son keeps on running up to his bedroom and all you hear is rhythmical banging that is followed by repeated grunting, you don't really want to know what's going on. And to me, that is funnier because that's actually around the behaviors associated with it rather than bang on. And I think those little stories really enrich people's understanding. But also, mental health is one of the worst things. Yes, of course it is important, and of course it is serious, but that doesn't always mean that we have to be. And I think that there can be a very head teachery kind of vibe to mental health. And I think comedy is a great way of cutting through that.
Do you find that people that go on your course, and maybe you as well, you know, does it help you process what happened? You know, is it part of the recovery?
100%. There was a period in comedy when a lot of people would use stand up just as therapy. So they would just go on and talk about their trauma with no jokes. And I that was kind of like didn't sit with me very well. But I did one for NHS workers, and there's an exercise that we do, and I said, give us a topic, and we can write something on it. And out of the 15 of them, 9 of them said COVID, and I was really nervous. And I, as soon as it first came up, I was like, no, we're not going to touch COVID. I'm not touching that with a barge pole. But they really wanted to talk about it. And what was really interesting to me was I was like, look, we've got to go for it then. If 9 of you want this, and I thought it could have gone awry. But yeah, it really increased my understanding of it. And it really gave me a deeper kind of insight into the sort of stuff that they went through. So I think it's a real symbiosis. I think going through stuff, and I'm very privileged that I have time and a job that makes me sit and kind of philosophize about these things that if I was a plasterer, I probably wouldn't be able to do, would I? I think actually doing it is great, but also listening about it as well. There's a famous quote, I think it's from Harry Deptford, who runs comedy courses, which is, if you can't be funny, be interesting.
So you did the stand up and the show in Edinburgh, and then you were approached to write a book about your experiences, and then things seem to have kind of snowballed from there. And now you're a kind of mental health ambassador, if that's the right term. How did that? Did you go into it thinking, well, actually, I'd like to become more of a voice in the mental health community, or did it just kind of evolve over time?
Absolutely not. I'm just a professional idiot. Yeah. I don't want to be ungrateful at all. But I think writing a book is one of the most unrewarding things you can ever do. And especially as they approached me, and I didn't have the idea then. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll make up this idea. And I used a psychological model called the trans-theoretical model, which subsequently you can use for any method of change. It's a really funky method. It basically says stage doesn't happen in one jump. There are 6 stages to it. So firstly, you need to realize you've got a problem. Then you need to realize and want to do something about it. Then you need to realize, want to do something about it, and put those things into action. And I use that as the backbone of the book in order to make it a little bit more interesting, so that people could pick it up and go, oh, in my eating disorder, I'm at that stage or this stage. But the actual process of writing a book, it took a good sort of from start to finish. I think it was a good 3-4 years and a big 18-month stint of writing it. And even now, if you buy it in Waterstones, I think I get 48p from every copy that is sold. And it's obviously not about the money, but it just sort of ticks along in the background. And it's only whenever I do events or stuff and people have got it, I open it up, and I already hate it. I just you are such a knob for writing that. And I've also put in music in it as well, which has dated it really difficultly. So even now you look back at it, and I think if ever my niece got a copy, which I hope to Christ she doesn't, she's going to look back at it and it's going to be like me flicking through my dad's, sort of old LPs and going, what's the Goon Show, Dad? God, why is this on vinyl? This is a weird process.
I think people listening to this will now want to go and buy your book. Had the opposite effect.
Very sweet. That's very sweet.
So I have to ask you, you talk about other topics as well. And I mentioned the adult circumcision for one, veganism for other. Are these all topics that close to your heart, or have you
Circumcision was very close to my penis. I mean, that was because the year after I did the show about the anorexia, when I was 25, and it was the first year I was with my partner, I had to have a circumcision, and it went bad, and it was really traumatic, and it was really horrible. And so I did a show about it. And to this day, I think it's one of the shows that I'm most proud of. No one cared about it. I mean, it went okay in Edinburgh, but it never had a tour. It never got recorded, and that's something that I really do regret because I loved that show so much, and it's very rare that I will say I'm proud of something. I was really proud of that show. It had an edge, it had a bite, it had a frustration within it. I still regret having been circumcised, and people sort of say you should still talk about it. It's not something I go into. And the weird thing is the vegan. I like theme shows. I really like theme shows for a number of different reasons. I think you can, helps find your audience more. People know what they're going in for, and it gives you an idea to go into it a little bit. Like I did a show all about the history of Western philosophy, not last year, but the year before. And I loved that. It was great because it's an excuse for me to look at topics that I love in detail and be silly. But the irony is, I think probably apart from Mental Health, the show that got more attention was the vegan show. And maybe one of the things that we've learned from this podcast is if you don't care about things, they go better. Because the show about the veganism, I was like, yeah, it was basically a sort of a little boy project. I tried to be vegan for a year, did a show about it. Where I'm not here to change anyone's opinion. Yeah, I was on the front cover of one of the Edinburgh Fringe magazines. I got like 3 or 4 different reviews, 2 5-star reviews. I was interviewed for so many different things, and I was like, whoa, lads! Like, you do realize I'm not here to change anyone's opinion. And they're all asking me things of like, yeah, what's your message to farmers? And I was like, I don't know. Like, have a lovely time. I haven't got any thoughts for farmers. So yeah, I like doing theme shows and topics that, yeah, veganism always comes up. And the circumcision show and the show about philosophy are ones that I'm like, oh my God, I love this. And everyone's like, yeah, you're on your own with that.
Just turning back to the topic of anorexia, do you think it's different now? Have lessons been learned?
I don't think lessons have been learned. I think it's different. I think the show that I'm doing at the moment, if I'm entirely honest, is incredibly angry, incredibly acerbic, incredibly dispirited, because the truth of the matter is there has never been a better, more exciting time for mental health. Yeah, if you go on social media, it's loads of people whining and moaning like we are back in the days of asylums. And the truth of the matter is, I think, and this is kind of what the show focuses on, is that people are now bored of the pity porn. When we have just been through a global pandemic, inflation has hit, there seems to be World War III on the horizon. You saying, oh, poor diddums me, it's so hard, you've got to now feel sorry for me, doesn't cut it anymore. And I've been saying this for years, that people are motivated by fun rather than fear. And I think those sob stories have now got to a point where people are getting frustrated with them. And I stopped doing stuff about mental health for a long time. And there was good reason for stopping doing stuff. I mean, the sort of biggest reason for that is I remember, and I'm trying to make this funny, and I can't make it funny because I know it's true. Someone that we know put up a post on Instagram about how they were feeling suicidal. And she said, look, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm actually posting this on here because I want to share my coping mechanisms. I always color coordinate my bookshelf because it's something fun and mindfulness and silly, and it doesn't cost anything. And I was like, brilliant, that's pragmatic, that's beautiful. And as you can imagine, everyone had written underneath, like, DM me, here's my number, do you want to meet up for a coffee? Let's meet up. And one author wrote underneath on this post about this woman's suicidal ideation, I see my book, and then put a copy to a link to where you could buy a copy of her book on Amazon. And it just made me realize, if you're using somebody else's suicidal ideation to flog your copy of a book about mental health, this thing is corrupt. And I feel that mental health has been very Waitrose shopping, Prosecco drinking, hummus dipping, yoga pant wearing middle class. And Don't get me wrong, that affects it. Don't get me wrong, I am someone who works in the arts. I am someone who is middle class. But suicide is the biggest killer of blokes under the age of 49. The industry that has the highest suicide rate is the construction industry. And suicide rates have been at an all-time high. They've been higher than they have for the past 25 years last year. So what we're doing isn't working. What we're doing is just preaching to the converted. And I'm not for that. I genuinely want to help people who genuinely need it. So I do think that there has been a big change. And I think we've now got to motivate people with entertainment rather than with sob stories.
Yeah, I mean, on this podcast, we talk to a lot of men, and it's often raw. It's not meant to be superficial. But there is humour that runs through every episode. Sometimes quite dark humour, sometimes a bit of blitz kind of humour, but it's there, and I do think that that's important in connecting with people. Just finally, if there's someone listening to this and they're recognising themselves in your story, perhaps that they're losing control of their of managing their weight, or the way that they manage themselves around food and exercise, what should they do? And I'm not saying you're a therapist or anything, but where can you signpost, or what could they do?
There's loads of things you can do, and I think you're absolutely right. You took the words out of my mouth. Let's not forget, I ain't a doctor. I'm a professional clown, essentially. So, take my advice with a pinch of salt. I would say, if you are worried, or maybe even if you're just wary and it's not fun anymore, I think first and foremost, something that people never say is, for all areas of mental health, it's okay to not understand how you feel. It's okay to not have those words. It always boils my piss when people always say, just talk. Because if it was that easy, people would figure it out themselves. I don't think anyone ever chooses to try and be mentally ill. I do think you choose to do something about it. So give yourself time, try and find the words, whether that is in a kinesthetic way of trying to describe it using colors. Like, I feel a bit like bluey gray today. I'm feeling a bit more, but whether it's music, that's one of the things that we do in the course, is to try and make the expression of emotions and your mental climate kind of a little bit more stupid and fun and silly. I used to play a game with one of my mates of who do you feel like today, which was always just a laugh whenever we meet up. I feel like a Paul today, bit of a chancer. I might go for a pint later on. And that's fun and that's funny. So I think it's okay to not have the words there. There are loads of resources on Beat's website. Beat is the UK's eating disorder charity, and their website is beateatingdisorders.org.uk, and reading other people's stories is really helpful to try and nab ideas and go, yeah, that gets me, and yes, I've had that and I didn't realize that, so that's related with that. So I think reading other stories, hearing other stories, listening to the stories is really important. I would say subscribe to the rest of this podcast and listen to other people's stories as well. And if you are feeling a bit wonky in the old upstairs department, a wonderful free resource, it's so overlooked for all mental health, is called the Hub of Hope. It's the UK's biggest mental health database, and it uses your device's geolocation to show you what local support there is, as well as what national support. And it's funded by, it's used by the likes of Calm, Samaritans, Mind, NHS. It's all different types of things, and you can filter what you're looking for. So yes, it could be eating disorders, or it could be depression, or it could be postnatal depression, whatever it is. And it will show you what is around you as well as what is nationally. And I always sort of say it's like the Just Eat of mental health services, which is obviously very ironic for a former anorexic to say, but I think that's very useful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. We'll put those links in the show notes as well. Thank you for joining us. It's been great to be entertaining. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you can relate to Dave's experience and want more information, he referenced two websites, the Hub of Hope, which is hubofhope.co.uk, which is the UK's largest mental health support directory, and Beat Eating Disorders, which is beateatingdisorders.org.uk. Now, there are also equivalent resources available in other countries, and you can find them through a simple Google search. And as always, we always recommend that you speak to your GP or a health professional in the first instance. To help raise the profile of the podcast, I would be very grateful if you could leave a review on whichever listening platform or directly on the website, mid-lifemen.com. And then finally, there's a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on the podcast, and it's available from Amazon and other online retailers.